Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I want to begin this analysis by saying that there always comes a time when you must come out and declare your position. A moment of reckoning, as I always call it. You can sometimes hide yourself, hoodwink some people, but a time comes when all the lies are exposed. The recent meeting between African leaders and Vladimir Putin in the Russia-African summit exposed a lot of things. And one of the persons who was exposed in this or from this meeting is the President of Kenya, William Samoei Ruto. Before this meeting, the President of Kenya had presented himself as a Pan-Africanist. Whenever they met, William Samoei Ruto would talk about matters that seemed to be very pertinent and at the core and the center and the heartbeat of Africa as a continent. For example, he made statements that it is high time we stopped depending on the dollar as the sole means of payment. He even went ahead trying to criticize the formation of the IMF, and he said that we should review policies to ensure that African nations are represented. And when he spoke, people thought that this time round we have found a new kid on the block, one who will champion the interests of Africans, especially when he talked about trying to deviate from dependence on the West. But I kept on insisting that I don't think that William Ruto means well, because from the movements I realized that he didn't walk the talk. So when Vladimir Putin invited African nations, because it usually happens, we had the first one I think 4 years ago, and these superpowers would always want to engage Africans to see how they can benefit each other. We had American African Summit in Washington, D.C. sometimes back this year. And then we also have the Chinese African Summit. They always try to see how we can mutually benefit. And Africa can only benefit if they speak on one language or on one accord. Now this meeting was really important, so much that even the African Union, head of African Union Commission attended. Unfortunately, when we thought that William Ruto was going to be there to present African case so that we can spread our wings instead of depending on the West alone, William Ruto was conspicuously missing. The head of African Union Commission said this: I participated along other African leaders at the first day of the Russia-African Summit in St. Petersburg, which highlighted the strong, long-standing Russia-African partnership, as we agreed on the need to deepen our cooperation for the shared and equal benefit of our peoples. So that is the head of African Union Commission, Mr. Musa Faki Mahamat. It tells just how important this was. We expected William Ruto to go there with his oratory skills, speak about the African need to cooperate with the other superpowers. Now, the other person who was there, because I just want to paint for you a picture that people are there. Yoweri Kaguta Museveni was also there. And these are the leaders who speak and act the talk. Yoweri Kaguta Museveni was saying, on the sidelines of the ongoing summit, I held bilateral talks with President Putin. My main proposition to Russia is that, and I want you to get that, my main proposition to Russia is that they discourage by policy the importation of raw materials from Africa and instead work with Africans to add value to their raw materials at the source. Look at that. Instead of speaking so that people can give you a standing ovation, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni went to the Russian African Summit, and he is saying something that is very important, that Russia must have a policy, because he's saying that the main proposition was that they discourage by policy the importation of African raw materials and instead add value at the source. And I think if you mean well, you mean well. And that is why I was saying that a moment of reckoning comes once. William Ruto, who believes so much about the unity of Africa, about how we need to cooperate with the other superpowers and continents, was missing. Well, people like Yoweri Kaguta Museveni were there speaking and telling proposing what Russia should be doing to Africa, which I think is a very important thing if they stop. And this should happen even to the US and China. Instead of importing our raw materials, exploiting them, some of them don't even follow the Nagoya Protocol, and they simply exploit our resources, and we get no value for it. That they should now add value from the source. And this is why I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, that we need to scrutinize and see the real characters of our president. Sometimes people had even started comparing William Ruto to the late Mama Gaddafi, the late Tanzanian president John Pombe Magufuli. But now look at them. Let me add, the other day, Museveni signed an anti-LGBTQ law. And this really ruffled him the wrong way with the US. And he stood firm and told them, we have our culture. You know, sometimes, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, there is a correlation, a dependent, we depend on each other. There are things like US, Russia, China get from Africa. But they don't need to impose on us some culture that we are not synonymous with. William Ruto, on the other hand, when Museveni was fighting among other African leaders, accepted the LGBTQ law through the back door, through the judiciary, and said that they have the freedom of association. And this is why I'm telling you that we cannot be hoodwinked that William Ruto is an anti-West. I have always maintained that this is a child of the West. They love him. While the summit was taking place in Russia, William Ruto got a call from the US Secretary of State, Blinken, praising him, how he's so much concerned about the ongoing wrangles in Africa, in Congo, in Sudan, and Niger. Forgetting the fact that he has been rejected even in Sudan. And this is why I'm telling you that we cannot pretend that William Ruto is the next Mama Gaddafi. Because if he really wanted Africans or Africa as a continent to make a U-turn, the only other way was to make a U-turn towards the east and work with Russia. Not forgetting that we need both the Russia, the US, China, and all these other people. But here he was missing when other presidents were there presenting their individual country cases and the African position on what is supposed to happen. And then you will see after this meeting, you will see other meetings coming up, and our president will be there making very wonderful speeches. He knows what is good for the ears, and people will be clapping, and people will be saluting him, giving him a standing ovation. Back in our country, our president knows what to speak where. He can promise you a number of things, and he will not implement any one of them. He knows and he understands the politics in Kenya. He has now graduated to the politics of Africa. He knows exactly. And this is my position, that William Ruto is a Trojan horse. He's only meant to perpetuate the interest of the West. And they want him to take over in Africa so that he champions their policies of the LGBTQ, the policies on the genetically modify, organisms, because once he told us that he is a scientist and he knows that GMO is good, when he was under pressure to include public participation before he introduces the GMOs. So he's there to champion what they want. And I think this summit came at the right time when many magazines in Africa and newspapers were busy praising the president of Kenya as the new Mama Gaddafi, as the new kid on the block, the new Pan-Africanist who wants to liberate and emancipate Africa from the jaws of the West. Now you know, because it is evident. And ladies and gentlemen, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni has really exposed William Samoei Ruto, if you ask me. Apart from just talking, he is busy acting the talks. And if we want, or if William Samoei Ruto, the president of Kenya, wants to convince and persuade us that he's the new Pan-Africanist, let him do better than what he's doing. And that is my take.